Elliot, how are you, mate? You okay?
Not really, actually. Well, to be honest with
Why
you,
not? What's going on?
there's been this fairly incredible story overnight in the Telegraph that has come from the Conservative Party, actually, that has estimated the cost of the Chagos deal at 35 billion quid, which is going to be 10 times higher than the government say. Now, we could sort of get into some of the calculations they use and the reasons why there is this big discrepancy between the government's calculations and the opposition's calculations. But I also want to sort of place this in the context of the wider economic picture and also the wider picture of Labour's economic and governing agenda. And I'm sort of going to like frame this to you, and I want to basically get your reaction as sort of the angry young man to see how conspiratorial we should be about this. I think basically when the Labour government came to power, there was I think they got a little bit of credit from groups on our side of the political ledger, a bit more than you might expect us to give a left-leaning government, because at least in opposition there was some good rhetoric about the need for fiscal responsibility.
Certainly, I mean, Rachel Reeves constantly talked about the record high tax burden, didn't she?
Absolutely. And then when they came in, there were signs very early on that they might actually take spending to some extent with some level of seriousness. And you saw that with the sort of 22 billion pound fiscal black hole. Now, been a lot of dispute about how legitimate that actually was, but at least that sort of leans into it. Okay, we do sort of care about the need to be careful about the way we're spending money. And since then, they have made a few basically failed attempts to actually cut back on public spending. You saw that with the winter fuel payment, and you saw that with the obviously the attempted changes to welfare. But all of those sort of attempts at sort of fiscal responsibility that they've ultimately had to backtrack on. And as a result, this has sort of created this now quite significant fiscal black hole. They're estimated at £40 billion. You add the £10 billion of headroom that Rachel Reeves wants, and that's £50 billion. And so all of their attempts to cut back on spending have failed. All their attempts to find ways to close that gap that don't relate to taxation have failed. So basically, they're left essentially with taxation as the only way to get by. And yet the one policy that they seem to be absolutely resolutely sticking to under all circumstances is this Chagos Deal.
Yeah. It's like they're ideologically committed to it in some way, even though it was a plan they inherited actually from the previous government. Surely, as from a purely like comms or PR standpoint, surely like a way in which to get a bit of favour with the British public while also doing some of these harsh spending cuts would be say, we're not going to do this Chagos deal, we're not going to do this sovereign sell-off, this is what the Tories did, we're not doing this. And yet, like you said, they've been adamant about it, and so much so that Starmer and various other members of the cabinet, including Lammy, like consistently defend it every single time in the name of British national security.
Yeah, and the extraordinary thing about it, as you said, it seems to be the one thing that they won't U-turn.
Yeah, right.
Right. Everything else they've sort of, once at least on spending side, tax side, they've not given in to much pressure. But on spending, they've essentially given in to everything. But what makes it, the Chagos deal different to, let's say, winter fuel is the winter fuel payment is a very poor way of transferring cash to people in need. But at least it is transferring cash to British citizens.
Yeah, right.
Maybe transferring cash from one British citizen that needs it more to another British citizen that needs it less, but it is still a cash transfer to a British citizen. And that's even the same with welfare benefits to some extent, although, as we know, a lot of welfare claimants aren't British, but most of them are at the very least. The Chagos Islands is this massive cash transfer of British taxpayers' money to the pockets of Mauritians, and they're actually going to abolish income tax. It's really, really difficult to square this project and this scheme with this broader narrative that Labour at least want to give off, that they're really careful with taxpayers' money. Yes, they may be taxing us loads more, but when that money comes in, they're trying to be careful with it. And yes, okay, maybe some of their attempts to be careful with it have failed, but they've at least tried, right? But this is just so kind of, I don't know how you square the circle. I don't know how to see this in anything but a very conspiratorial way.
Yeah, I suppose we have to get into that point then. Is it how are they? We're unable to look at where we're looking at this from the outside. We're unable to square the circle. How do you think, first of all, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are squaring the circle? Do they genuinely believe their own guff about national security? Do they believe that it's a deal that someone else has started? You know what, Starmer's like, oh, legalistic. I have to continue on with the deal in order to continue on. Or do you think it's a more pernicious way in which Labour can sort of give but not red meat to their base in some way, but say like, oh look, we're sort of and being anti-colonial, anti-British, like empire, imperialism, all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of a do you think that all of those three can exist at the same time, or do you reckon it's more one than the other?
Again, this is the narrative that they use, right? Which is that essentially, you know, the Chagos Islands, essentially the British government now recognises the Chagos Islands should be Mauritian. The only reason why we wouldn't give it to Mauritius is because of this military base, Diego Garcia, that is a crucial UK-US military base on the Chagos Islands, but actually as part of this deal, it secures the future of that. But, you know, I was looking into the history, as you do, of Mauritius and the Chagos Islands a little bit. And the extraordinary thing about it is that Chagos Islands was governed from Mauritius as part of the colonial project for centuries. It was firstly under the French from early 1700s, and then when the British took it over in the early 1800s. But Mauritius has never been an independent country. You know, Mauritius was only settled about 1,000 years ago, first by the Arabs. And most Mauritian settlement now is actually European colonizers and the descendants of European colonizers, and also African slaves. Again, Chagos Islands was only first inhabited in the last couple of hundred years. So there has never been a Mauritian, an independent state of Mauritius and the Chagos Islands. The reason why the Chagos Islands was governed from Mauritius was purely, it was just an administrative function. You know, Chagos Islands wasn't big enough for its own administrative state. Mauritius was the closest notable British colony that we felt Chagos Islands could be governed by. You know, at the time, India, we were starting to, which is India's much closer to Chagos Islands, but our control over India in the early 1800s was still very patchwork. It wasn't a suitable place to govern Chagos Islands from in the way that Mauritius was. And then in 1965, we decided to separate Chagos Islands from Mauritius. And again, this was still when we governed Mauritius, right? This is still a UK colony, and we decided to separate it. But what was extraordinary, and this was new to me, is when we separated Chagos Islands from Mauritius in 1965, as part of a sort of the talks about independence that Mauritius got in 1968, we actually compensated Mauritius for that at the time. Yeah. So we gave our Luxus £3 million, worth about £150 million today. So we compensated Mauritius for separating these two territories, right? And that's why it didn't come up in the 1968 independence agreements. Mauritius never raised it. We then, as part of joining the ICJ and International Court of Justice, accepting sovereignty over the International Court of Justice law and rulings over UK foreign policy and UK decision-making, we actually excluded Commonwealth countries from any ICJ rulings, which means the ICJ rulings do not apply to any countries which are or have been Commonwealth countries, exactly as Mauritius has been. So the ICJ has absolutely no jurisdiction over this. Mauritius and the Chagos Islands, Mauritius has never actually controlled the Chagos Islands. The British government controlled Chagos Islands and governed it from Mauritius, but there was never, you know, this is very different. So I cannot see a single way you can construct a serious, cogent narrative that suggests that the ICJ advisory ruling from a few years ago should be anything to taken seriously. And yet we've essentially keeled over and we're paying for the privilege. So I just cannot see a non-conspiratorial way to look at this.
Yeah, but the whole point of that wouldn't just be, I mean, I can understand, I mean, we know what Starmer's like. I can understand his sort of desire to appease international courts and international lawyers. I mean, he loves all that kind of stuff. It's his dream, right?
Yeah.
But also the last Conservative government must have kowtowed and caved as well. So I'm not sure, you know, even though obviously we can to some extent blame Starmer for the way that he is, but why on earth would, you know, I think it was Cleverly who was foreign secretary at the time. Why would he do that? It's because he's not exactly in the same vein and from the same sort of lawyer managerial class as Starmer is. So I don't know what your take on that might be.
Yeah, I mean, there are criticisms of Cleverly that he's a little bit too civil service brain, so he goes along with officials. I think probably what he would say is that the reason why they engaged with these negotiations with Mauritius was essentially a delaying tactic. It's a useful thing to say on the international stage when this is raised, to say we're having negotiations with Mauritius. It's useful for relations with Mauritius. I think he would say, and the last Conservative government would say, that when it actually came down to it, they wouldn't have signed any deal. Now, I can see you're skeptical about that.
Because why would he avoid being in the chamber multiple times when they're talking about the Chagos deal, right? And that's not just during when he was running for leader of the party. That was also afterwards, right?
Yeah.
If he went in there and said, yes, this was on the table, but I would have never have done this.
Yeah.
That would have been fine. But he wasn't. He was cowering in the back room. So surely, if that point was true, he would have been on the back benches shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah, and I think your skepticism is justified. I do think there is clearly some blame to be laid at the last government's doorstep. As I said, they do claim that it was a delaying tactic.
Yeah,
but at the same time, to some extent, it's counterfactual. What we know is it is this government that has signed this deal.
Yeah, of course.
And 3.5 to 35 billion pounds is the dispute. And let's just sort of go into where that.
Yeah, I was going to ask because we did some work at the TPA, sort of analysing these costs, and we occasionally came. There was a lower figure which was around 8-9 billion. I think there was a higher figure which was about 18 billion quid or so. Right, vastly under what the current cost is. But Starmer himself said around 3.4 billion, constantly on TV, in the newspapers, and now it comes out that it's closer to 35 billion. One, where on earth has that number come from? Because that's 10 times higher than the original number. Yeah. And two, why on earth was this figure not put out to begin with? Because now Starmer's going to be accused of just barefaced lying over this.
So it's been very clear that the government has done everything in its power to restrict information of this, or restrict flow of information on this. It's been almost impossible to get them to give any serious information to Parliament. I think that is a scandal in and of itself. I really do think, actually, a big difference between this government and the last government is if the government had done this deal, I do think they would have given the information to Parliament, and I think it would have been out there. I don't know that for certain, but I think this government, particularly when Sue Gray was there, has been defined by its opaqueness, its opacity. Now, so this information should have been out a long time ago. Basically, it's essentially how you calculate the fact that, and this is where I think proper TPA supporters, eyes might start to glaze over here, and they might think, come on, this is absolute nonsense. And in some respects, it's an accounting trick, essentially, what we're talking about. The government is going to pay a certain amount of money over a 100-year period to Chagos Islands in order to lease back Diego Garcia, this military base we spoke about.
Yeah.
Now, it's estimated at something like £100 million a year. But the problem is you need to, there's a real point here, and there's a point that I think is I'm very skeptical of, and we spoke about it in the office earlier. One is to account for inflation, right? So if you agree to give Mauritius £100 million in year one and £100 million in year 100, £100 million in year 100 is going to be worth much, much less, right? So you'd rather give that £100 million in 100 years' time than that £100 million now, because of inflation, right? Simple nature of inflation. We know that inflation ticks up at 2-3% a year. We know that as a result, government revenues tick up, salaries tick up, even without proper economic growth. Those things just naturally tick up. So part of that is accounting for inflation, but part of this is also accounting for something called the social time present rate. I think it's called.
That sounds nice in civil service accounting.
STPR. Yeah. I can't. Social time preference rate. Yeah, I've got it. So the social time preference rate. So basically, to explain how this works, very, very simply, it's this idea that £100 million now is inherently worth more than £100 million worth 100 years, even if you account for inflation. So even if you uprated it. Number of reasons why that's the case. Firstly, just time. You'd prefer the money now than in 100 years' time, 10 years' time. Anybody that's been in a job knows that they'd like a little bit more money now.
Yes, of course.
Money in the future, less important. But one of the important reasons why we have this metric is not just to reflect the time difference and the uncertainty. It's also to reflect the fact that money used now for another purpose could be invested, it could be grown. You could actually do something to get economic benefits with it, which means that in 100 years' time, if you've had loads of economic growth as a result of that, you actually, even if you account for inflation, if you're a twice as wealthy country, that money's going to be worth less to you, right?
Yeah, of course.
So it's supposed to basically account for the fact that there's a lot more we can do with this money now, and what we do with this money now will benefit us in the future. The problem with the Chagos deal is the money we are spending is money we are spending to give away a sovereign territory.
Yeah.
This is an economically damaging situation. Whatever you say about this, if we were to put the Chagos Islands out to tender on the open market, and we said to the countries of the world who would like to buy the Chagos Islands, we wouldn't be paying £35 billion to get rid of the Chagos Islands. We would be earning however much we'd earn, right? So the problem with using this metric, and I'll just get your views on this metric in a second, and whether or not this passes, it doesn't pass the smell test.
No.
Right? Yes, okay, fair enough. The money we are spending to give away the Chagos Islands in 100 years' time, we'd rather be spending that money than now. But the alternative is we don't have to spend this money at all, right?
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And the the interesting part is you're completely right. The opaqueness, actually, I'll just quickly touch on that again. I remember, I think it was during a session of Foreign Office questions, actually, and various backbench Tory MPs asked Lammy about the cost of it. Oh, well, we don't have those figures. I'm the right honourable gentleman. We'll find out in due time once all the correct receipt, all that kind of like guff, basically, even though they've known what the figures are. And then they change them again so that it's now higher. It's now at a £35 billion high. I think the thing that really annoys me the most about it is not just the fact that we're giving money directly to a country which is to some extent aligned with our enemies, places like China and the like. Right, if you're talking about national security concerns, that's a big one of mine. The thing I get annoyed about, and you briefly mentioned it earlier, was the Mauritian Prime Minister said that the money from the Chagos deal was going to go towards debt repayments, and they were going to raise 80% of their workers out of income tax entirely. Right, so the British government, and this sounds really silly, but it's true. The British government is paying money so that 80% of Mauritians don't have to pay income tax, and their national debt goes down. Right, while our tax burden increases, and our national debt increases, and debt interest on a national increases as well. And it just comes back to something I like to talk about, and something we've been talking about the TPA quite a lot recently. Sort of the two-tier stay. Right, we talk about 2 tiers justice plenty, but it feels like there's a two-tier system for taxpayers in this country where they play by the rules. They get up every single morning, they go to work, they run small businesses, they do the correct thing, while illegal immigrants, welfare, people on welfare, and now it seems Mauritians are receiving the fruits and benefits of their money, while actually ordinary taxpayers get nothing. And it seems that, I know we talked earlier where there's an ideological motive, it seems like this is like ingrained in this current Labour government's like overall governing philosophy.
Yeah, so whether or not we count it as £35 billion over the next 100 years, or whether we say actually that £35 billion for us today is only worth £3.5 billion, that's still good money.
Oh yeah,
£3.5 billion quid. Yeah, okay, it doesn't make much of a dent in the national debt, but it makes a small dent.
Yeah, it's a small dent.
And given this is a government that cannot cut spending anywhere else and is only able to resort to growth-damaging tax rises in order to fill the fiscal black hole, it just seems mad that the one obvious thing that they wouldn't cut wouldn't be this. I mean everything else at least has some sort of benefit to some British taxpayer or some element of Britain. Whatever it is whether it's the cultural grants, whether it's the benefit payment, whatever it is, all of most of these payments, at least it benefits someone within the borders of the United Kingdom, right? And foreign aid is another topic, of course. But excluding foreign aid, most of that spending, at least to some extent, goes to someone else on these islands. But the Chagos Islands, as you say, goes to a whole group of people on a whole separate set of islands. And I actually think probably one thing it is worth saying is, fair play to the Mauritians.
Oh yeah, they played the blinder on this one.
And extraordinarily, I remember they actually rejected it at one of the first deals.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So earlier this year, the Mauritian government actually almost walked away from the negotiating table because the price they were being paid wasn't high enough. It's an extraordinary brass tacks.
And our government went back and said, "Oh, sorry, guys,
Yeah.
there's more."
This small island archipelago of, I don't know the population, but I mean, I'd be surprised if it's even over 1 million people.
Yeah.
I'd assume it has some sort of military, but I'd imagine it's pretty small. I mean, this is a tiny, it's not quite a microstate, but I'm not sure it's much more than that.
Yeah.
That is known essentially as for nothing else other than being admittedly a very much a dream honeymoon location, but really that's about it. It's managed to, put a sort of Donald Trump style squeeze on
strong Dom Keir Starmer,
His Majesty's government. Formerly the government that from a small little, office on Whitehall ruled essentially the world.
Yeah,
and now has been humbled by the Mauritian government. So I have a very begrudging respect for the Mauritian government.
Yeah,
and I think that what the Mauritian government should remind British taxpayers and the British. Anyone that wants to be in British politics is it is possible to do things.
Yeah.
It is possible to have a really firm, rigorous understanding of your national interest. And for Mauritius, this isn't a national interest.
Yeah.
We can dispute the legal jurisdiction. We can dispute all of that, but gaining military significant territory plus an amount of money worth equivalent to your GDP or whatever it is, that's in your national interest, right?
Yeah.
And they managed to secure it. So
yeah, and good on them. I mean, the fact that, like you said, Starmer and this government was just pushed over. I mean, I just giggle in my head. I've got this image in the head of them at the table going, "I'm sorry, Prime Minister, not accepting this deal. We want more money." And Starmer runs away and goes to the phone to Reeves and said, "We need a few billion, please." And she goes, "Yes, Prime Minister, sir, absolutely, immediately. Quickly. Farmers pay for it. Cheers.
Savers, pensioners.
Yeah, off you go. You pay for it, mate." So I think it's funny, but it's also slightly not funny because this has actually happened now, and although there is still time to scrap it, I have a feeling like you do that they are almost religiously committed to this plan now, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few days, obviously this story's caused quite a stink in the last 24 hours or so, I wouldn't be surprised until we see Starmer come out on the radio waves and say, "Well, it's a price worth paying for national security and blah blah," but appearing to appear tough. And from a sort of, again, from a PR comms perspective, I just can't wrap my head around it. Why on earth they are so bullish with this when everything else they've just gone, run away. We can't cut welfare, guys. We can't cut benefits. We're going to run away from basically, want to U-turn on basically everything because the poll said so.
Yeah.
Right. And my focus group disagrees with this one. Like no one agrees with the Chagos deal, and yet they're still pushing through with it.
And you're right. It's really jarring.
Yeah.
I think the reason why it's jarring is because generally the image that this government gives off, I don't think they deliberately do this, is that they don't believe anything. They have absolutely no principles. And I don't think that's quite true. I think they have a few principles. It's just the principles that they have are very disturbing, because you only have to look at which policies they've pursued despite the extraordinary damage being done to them, have they refused to jettison, right? And there's a few. There's the Chagos Islands, right? Absolutely no benefit to this country, causing them an extraordinary amount of pain, massive fiscal issues, and yet they're pursuing it anyway. There's the family farm and family business tax. Nobody thinks it's actually going to raise any serious money, while it's going to decimate businesses and farms.
So resolute on that.
And VAT on private schools.
Yeah.
Which, again, now everybody thinks is probably actually going to cost money because of the influx of private school children into public school, state schools, and also as a result of millionaires leaving this country at the fastest rate of any country in the world. And there's lots of reasons why they do that. But I can tell you VAT on private schools is one of the reasons, right? Yeah. And those are all policies that are causing them huge pain. They're not getting any benefit from in terms of, it's one thing, okay, fine, national insurance, the jobs tax, absolutely devastating to the economy. Or they are at least raising revenue from it. So that, there is some benefit to that tax from a governing perspective. VAT on private schools, family farms and business tax, and this, no governing benefit, which means that the only reason they're doing it is because I really, really think they despise private schools.
Okay.
They despise the fact that there are, aspirational families that can give their children a better education outside of the state. They really despise. They have a loathing for farms and family farms and businesses. That I can't quite put my finger on why. I guess they're a very urban group. Maybe they have a general
Not even
contempt
rural.
for
I mean, they've got lots of rural constituencies.
at least
now.
those in the cabinet, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the family businesses, probably, again, none of them have worked in business, so they and they think that businesses are, mostly a leech on society, I think, is, let's be honest. And then on the Chagos Islands, they really believe that global interests are more important than national interests.
Yeah, I think the first one, I think the last one you mentioned, I think that's been shown by the way in which, well, first of all, appointing David Lammy as foreign secretary.
Yeah.
First of all, that's a clear signal.
Yeah.
Second of all, the fact that Starmer's never happier than when he's, doing international visits, even if it's about something good like Ukraine.
Yeah.
He's never happier. And thirdly, you have murmurings, obviously not just about the Chagos stuff, but also about, I remember Lammy a while back was like considering reparations for various ex-colonial countries, and with shrugging and going, oh, well, it might be morally necessary. Now, obviously that's never going to happen. But I don't know. I mean, with the Chagos stuff, you don't know anymore. But I think the three things you mentioned there, I think is very, very interesting, because all of those, because obviously the accusation that, many left-wing types throw at Starmer is that, he's Tony Blair, it's New Labour 2.0. All three of those things are actually pretty left-wing and pretty socialistic.
Yeah, they are.
You can see Corbyn pushing through, the VAT in private schools. I mean, that's textbook Corbyn. Caring more about international interest than British interests, textbook Corbyn. Family farms tax and the family businesses tax. That's also textbook Corbyn, really. So is this Starmer and the government really revealing their actual preferences and their identical preferences? And is it time that, even though people like me and you perhaps don't talk about it in the sense that Starmer doesn't believe in anything, because I think we've always believed he clearly does, but is it time for people on our side of the argument to stop being so complacent about Labour and Starmer?
I think that's right.
Right.
I think it is really revealing of what they actually think. Again, look at a couple of other policies. On winter fuel, I do think that they don't like the fact that we give £300 to wealthy pensioners. I don't think they care that much.
No.
Which is why when they actually came up to opposition, they were willing to scrap it. Again, planning, I think they probably broadly do think that there's a problem with the planning system. We do need to build more houses that will unlock growth. But they don't care that much, which is why they've essentially watered down all the planning laws and planning bill, because, they've come up against opposition. So if you look at, the problem is the areas that some sort of free market groups have been sympathetic towards Labour on, those policies Labour don't care that much about. This government, it's not to say that the government didn't have an intention to make some progress on some of them, but they don't care about it that much. And so when they've run into opposition, particularly from their own side, they've abandoned it. As you said, the areas where they are refusing to budge despite opposition, and often despite opposition across the political spectrum. There are, Dan Needle, for example, has sounded the warning about the damage that the family farms tax could do if you don't change the way it operates. And I just think you have to look at, a couple of, the Chagos Islands is another big one. These are core fundamental principles that they believe in. And they probably think of them as legacy policies. And I think Keir Starmer thinks about, in 20 years' time, giving speeches about his legacy and being able to give speeches all around the world at every international forum, talking about what he was able to do for global peace and global progress by handing the Chagos Islands, as he would say, back to Mauritius. But as we discussed, it was only governed from Mauritius as an administrative colonial function, not actually as part of an independent Mauritian Chagosian state.
Maybe I'm being biased here and I can't see his position here, but I can't even begin to understand how you could consider. I can understand Chagos perhaps because, he's a lawyer, international bureaucracy, he loves all that kind of stuff, right? But how on earth can you say that the VAT on private schools and destroying family farms and businesses is a legacy-worthy policy? Going on the national stage, I destroyed the family farm in Great Britain.
I mean, there are Labour politicians, though, right, from the 20th century that talk about sort of the destruction of grammar schools as one of their great legacies.
Yes, of course, that's true.
And because again, there
was a hierarchical and class-based element to that, though. The family farm stuff, I think, doesn't reek of class politics.
Well, I mean, some people view it differently, though, right? I mean, the lower middle classes really saw the grammar schools as the ultimate symbol of how you can get a foot up. Yes, for some of the really deprived, the grammar school system did essentially lock you out at an early age from And so there were problems with the grammar,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
secondary modern, and no, I think even the biggest proponents of grammar schools don't argue that. But at the same time, the people that advocate for the grammar schools are probably only one rung up on the social ladder. But there are Labour politicians that see the destruction of the grammar school as one of their great legacies, because it equalised things for
Yeah.
children, and it equalised things by making everything much worse, but it was worse at a similar level. And I think there are Labour politicians that I think they would like to ban private schools.
Oh,
that's the thing.
yeah, some of them would.
I just think that they don't have the. I think they recognise the political difficulty of doing it.
Yeah, of course.
That is an enormously difficult policy, and so they think they can frame VAT on private schools as a simplification measure, right? And so they have a line for that. So when you say yes, I would be horrified to think that would be my legacy, but that's not how they think.
No.
I think they think that private schools are a genuine, to some extent, an evil, and so if you can destroy them, then you've destroyed an evil.
But the family farms thing is more specific to my question. That is like, do they think family farms are evil?
That is more difficult. I think.
How is that a legacy policy of a Labour government? Because even like that has widespread opposition, not just from, because also this was dropped on the Environment Secretary's lap, by the way. Like he didn't know he was going to get proposed. He has to take all the hits when he goes to the NFU conferences and meet farmers in, around the country. He has to deal with that firsthand. But it was a Reeves policy conjured up at the last minute, and it's not going to raise all that much. The Lib Dems, Tories, Reform are so vigorously against it, to the extent they're all on stage at the same farmers protest, right? And, why have you got
Jeremy Clarkson?
You've got Daisy Cooper, Jeremy Clarkson, Farage, and Kemi all on stage at the same time saying the exact same things. How is family farms tax how can that be a legacy policy when, one, it's not going to raise any money, and two, it has such a widespread opposition, and three, it's gonna hurt various Labour MPs who now have rural constituencies, right? It's gonna shoot themselves in the foot.
What's your take?
My take is I don't think it is a legacy policy for theirs. I think it's just pure treasury. I need to raise some more money immediately, and I will do it anyway. Like with the winter fuel payments they've got this big buck in the treasury. They bring it down, like really unpopular things. And most chancellors go, no, I'm not doing that because that's politically moronic. But Reeves was just desperate for money and went, yep. I think with the family farms tax, I think to some extent, one, there's an inheritance tax angle to it, which is fine because obviously they do believe that inheritance tax is good because that's the redistribution of wealth from wealthier people. Although, of course, farmers aren't wealthy per se; they're asset rich, not cash rich. But that's transfer of wealth that they can put back into the system to put into, state schools or the healthcare service or whatever it might be. But I think it's actually just a simple sort of cynical money raising operation rather than something that they can sit back in 10 years' time and go, yes, I destroyed the family farm.
And yet, they reverse winter fuel payment. They have to reverse this. And so I just think, and again, I'm getting very cynical here, but I really think they have a contempt for wealth as well.
Yeah.
I think they have a loathing for wealth. And because, yes, they have rural MPs now, but the intellectual powerhouse of this government, what the key opinion makers and the key policy makers, they're all very urban.
Yeah, they are.
All very, very urban.
Is the cabinet almost entirely urban?
It's almost entirely.
Yeah.
And as they pretty much all represent urban seats.
Yeah, like Birmingham.
Johnny Reynolds is Manchester, Rachel Reeves is Leeds, Keir Starmer, Wes Streeting are London, obviously.
Yeah.
And most of the rest are urban as well. So I don't think that they get this point that you mentioned, that farmers are only wealthy in name. Their day-to-day experience is not one of they have a relatively low income and they struggle. They just have a vast amount of assets. But if that asset's combine harvester, that doesn't make you feel very wealthy. But they don't see it like that. I think they probably take this slightly idealized view of farming. You have this massive land, all these massive assets. And all they think is, no, you're extraordinarily wealthy, and so as a result, you shouldn't be able to pass on to your children. It's just that simple. But anyway, I think we've gone
slightly off topic. Yeah, slightly off topic. But I think we do like we'll mention one more thing about the Chagos deal because I'd like to hammer this home quite significantly.
Yeah,
is there any way that any future government could possibly scrap or get rid of this, say if the Tories or Reform or whoever it might be come into power in 2029? Can they say, sorry, Mauritius, this deal was not what we wanted, it's not what we agree with, I know you were promised this, but we're a sovereign territory and we are saying, no, we want our money back. We're not going to give you any more. Sorry, cancelled it. Bye. Basically, just no more of the guff, no more of the national security nonsense. It's just, no, this is a bad deal for Britain and we don't want to fulfill it anymore. Goodbye. Are they going to get caught up? Can they do that? And if so, like, how are they going to do it? And also, if they can't do it, is that because of like the International Court of Justice?
Well, I suppose it depends on the situation at the time. If the deal is fully completed and fully hand over, and we've recognised Mauritius as Chagos Islands as Mauritius sovereign territory, I don't see how we can now.
Yeah, okay.
Of course, we can in the sense that, you know, whatever you say about the British Army and its cash-strapped nature, we would still confidently beat Mauritius.
Oh, easily.
However, I don't actually see a situation where the any UK government goes to war with Mauritius to reclaim that territory. Possibly if there is an obvious way that Mauritius has breached the deal. So, for example, if we uncover that, you know, Mauritius has given significant access to the Chinese intelligence services to Chagos Islands, and maybe that could serve as a genuine, more than a pretext to retaking the islands, but excluding some very serious provocation and some very serious abrogation on the part of the Mauritians of the deal, I'd be really, really shocked.
Okay.
It's just not the way the British government does things. And, I don't want to get into this issue, but a really interesting point, a really valid point that Jenrick makes about the ECHR is the reason why we can't stay in the ECHR and just ignore its rulings, like a lot of governments do. It's just because that's not in the British mindset. That's not in the British way of doing foreign policy. British foreign policy has always been about meeting your obligations.
Yeah.
Always been about meeting your obligations, which means the only way to avoid those obligations is to actually completely step back from the situation, completely step back from the whole treaty you've signed, but only doing through formal processes. Once we've handed sovereign territory over to Mauritius, it is Mauritian sovereign territory. And once we've recognised that is a legally binding contract. And yes, we could breach it.
Yeah, we could.
But that's just never been the British way of doing things. We wouldn't just breach the ECHR. What we do is leave the ECHR, and then you're no longer bound by its obligations. So I don't think it would, but who knows?
And the thing is,
the Overton window's moving.
The Overton window is moving, and that I think the issue to finish on is British politicians are stuck in a clear psyche of not just like old-fashioned gentlemen's agreements, this is what we do, and we fulfill our obligations to NATO and to the United Nations. Well, no one else does, right? All at the expense of British taxpayers. But there's also an issue in British politics generally, and this is not just politicians. This is even people in our circles and in the media and like. So that's how the way things are done. Yeah, and I hate that argument because it shows a lack of creativity, a lack of vision. Yeah, right. If that's the way things are done, is also not the way things have to be, and we can actually do things and change things that are in our own interest, even if in the past we have historically done things which are not in our own national sovereign, just like giving away sovereign territory. So I think that, if Reform and the Tories are serious about maybe doing something about this in the future, they need to think a lot more creatively about how to actually deal with obligations like this, and whether it's not just about leaving things but also repealing things in its entirety, and also just being a bit more bullish in a sort of not a fully Trump-like way, but in maybe in the way Mauritius did to us, actually, in a way like that. So I think that's an important point to make there. But all right, Chagos Deal, that's £35 billion down the drain over the next 99 years or so. Congratulations to the Mauritians for that.
Yeah, I think we should say that again. Yeah,
enjoy your tax cuts, folks.
I would like some of those.
Yeah, enjoy your tax cuts. Enjoy your debt repayments. While in the People's Republic of Great Britain, we've got a £2.7 trillion national debt and a record high tax burden. So well, thanks for
happy days.
Thanks for talking to us, Elliot.
Cheers.
Cheers, mate.